Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Christine Thrower Skinner, and as of today, I am the proud 8-year manager for the Village of Gulf in Palm Beach County. Funny story, 9 years ago, I went to the So You Want to Be a Manager session and came back a year later as a manager, so that was fun. So it works. If those are your wannabes, it really works. So it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for this session, Why Belonging is Important to Your Employees and Organizational Well-Being. Carl Rush brings over a decade of experience advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility at the executive level for both academia and the public sector. Carl is the inaugural Chief Equity Officer for Loudoun County, Virginia. He specializes in working with organizational leadership and local communities to create equity frameworks and facilitates dialogue and organizational practices that support the development and adoption of equity as a shared value. He serves as a technical expert addressing equity as it is applied to policies, programs, practices, and budget decisions with an overall vision to advance equity. His wealth of professional experience and volunteer involvement on the boards of numerous organizations have earned him a reputation as a practitioner able to build and sustain real and lasting change. Dr. John Daly is Associate Professor of Public Administration and was the founding school director for USF's School of Public Affairs at the University of South Florida, Tampa. He received his Ph.D. in Public Policy and Master of Public Affairs degrees from Indiana University, Bloomington. He's a 20-year FCCMA affiliate. Thank you. In 2014, John was the recipient of the International City County Management Association's Academic Award in memory of Stephen B. Sweeney. He also received the 2014 Florida City and County Management Association President's Award. John is president of Creative Insights Corporation, a Florida-based S corporation, which he co-founded in 1996. Over the past 27 years, he has provided consulting services to many municipalities in the Tampa Bay metropolitan area. Pamela McGee is the 2023 president of the Greater Orlando Society of Human Resource Management. I had to ask her what that meant because I'm not an HR person. I did not know that. And the Assistant Vice President of Human Affairs, Talent Management, and Total Rewards for Valencia College. In addition to holding both SHRM and HRCI level certifications, Pam has more than 30 plus years of performance driven with 25 plus years of combined expertise in human resource management, talent acquisition, corporate government, and employment law. Dr. Susannah Bruns is an associate professor at Florida International University. She worked as a policy analyst at the Office of Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, where she collaborated with the White House, Congress, various federal government agencies, and advocacy groups. She received both her Ph.D. and MPP degrees from the American University. Dr. Alley's research focuses on factors that influence public sector employee career choices, with particular attention on the influence of the political environment on career choices. And I hope I said that right, Alley or Ally, I'm not sure. Nonetheless, I'm going to introduce Carl Rush to get you started.
Thank you all for coming. I know right after lunch, this is the most coveted spot to be in a presentation. I apologize, I'm actually sprained my ankle, so I won't be up and moving around like I normally do. I was playing basketball with some younger guys. I had something to prove, and I think I proved it without a shadow of a doubt. But for the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to talk about psychological safety and why it's really important for your organizations to consider psychological safety and also to have it at the forefront. So to get started, a couple of our learning goals will really be to understand, what it is and why it's important within your organizations. But also we'll explore Tim Clark's 4 phases of psychological safety. We'll go into depth on each of those. And I promise you, this is going to be sort of an interactive presentation. So get comfortable with the person next to you or the persons next to you, because you'll be talking with them. If you decided to sit by yourself, make a new friend, right? Just get up and move close to someone else, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But also learning the different strategies that create a psychologically safe organization. And then at the end, sort of a take-home, you all will work on your own sort of action plan. So how many of us have heard this quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast? So Peter Drucker is the one who came out with that quote. And really what that's about is that, with the proper strategy, we create rules for our organization. But truthfully, culture is what is determined how that game and how those rules are actually played out within your organization. So when we think about culture, that really comes down to people's values, their attitude, their assumptions, their customs, their norms, how they really present their authentic selves like to work and who we see when they come to work. And it's important to everyone within an organization, but it must start with leadership, is to understand what is the culture of your organization and how is it represented? What does it look like within your organization? It is actually the number one most positive thing that you can bring to your organization is to make it a psychologically safe organization. So what is it? Well, Amy Edmondson from Harvard University coined this phrase, psychological safety. And it is a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, and that a team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So when we think about that interpersonal, putting that into context, that interpersonal risk-taking, a lot of times within organizations, people have ideas, they have thoughts, but they keep it to themselves. Have you ever heard anyone say, hey, I come to work, I do my job, and I go home? We hear that all the time. That is probably one of the key indicators that the organization struggles within the psychological safe realm as well. So it's interesting because Google did a study. It was called Project Aristotle. And so Project Aristotle Google was trying to build the best team or teams at Google to pump out productivity. What does that actually look like? So they went across the nation and they surveyed hundreds of executives at different senior levels and employees within different organizations across the board. And it's interesting, they conducted over 200 interviews. There were 250 attributes that were part of this study that Google was doing. And there was over 180 active teams that were a part of this. And it's very interesting because when we look at Project Aristotle, the findings of that is the number one thing that came out of that with the findings was psychologically safe organizations, of what was really important to organizations. So you look at some of the things that are linked here. Number 5, the impact of an organization was 5th on the list from being a psychological safe organization. So we recognize that this is something that's super important to a lot of people. You may not use the term psychologically safe within an organization, but it is. We can hear people when they have conversations with one another. Sometimes in exit interviews, you'll hear things that really pinpoint if the organization was struggling in that area or not. So it's interesting. So what is the cost for an organization if they breach psychological safety? It's interesting when we look at how people process social rejection. Social rejection is processed in a very similar way as physical pain. And so when people get that, they become very defensive, they become dejected, all of those things. But let's look at some of these statistics that are here. What's the cost for the breach of that? It says 48% intentionally decrease their work ethic. It's 48%. 47% intentionally decrease time spent at work. Anyone ever heard of a mental health day? Right? People take them all the time. 38% intentionally decrease the quality of their work. 80% lost time or work time worrying about an incident. 63% lost time avoiding the offender. 66% said that their performance declined. 78% said that their commitment to the organization has declined. 12% said that they left their job because of an incident that happened at work. And 25% admit that they're taking their frustrations out on customers or even their workmates during that time. So we recognize these are some large and alarming numbers within an organization if this is not something that's pinnacle to the organization. So looking at the retention and recruitment cost. So we have an HR person here, and no doubt she will probably agree with this, as well. It said that 75% of the reasons employee turnover can be prevented if organizations deem psychologically safe organizations to be something that is a core value within their organization. 16% decrease in retention for employees who aren't comfortable giving upward feedback. Psychologically safe creates 3.5 times more likely contribute to their fullest potential. There's a 50% drop in turnover risk, 75% reduction in sick days, and then stress and burnout of reduction. So often we're looking at strategies on how do we recruit people to our organization. And we spend lots of money trying to figure out how do we recruit people. And then once we get them through the door, it's how do we retain them, as well. But some of these employees are walking out of the door because the retention part, right? And if a person doesn't feel like they belong within an organization, most likely they're going to tell other people when they're looking to apply, that's not a good organization to work for. And word of mouth is huge these days. So we've talked about what it was, but what is it not? It's not being nice. It's not job security. So it's not where you're sugarcoating something and you're making everyone feel great, about themselves. And a person says, oh, well, I don't have to be as productive because this is a psychologically safe organization. It's not that. It doesn't guarantee that all ideas will be applauded. It's not a license to whine. And it's not freedom from conflict. In fact, it helps to facilitate conversations when conflicts do arise. Not a permission to slack off. It's not the same as trust, and it's not enough for high performance, and it's not lowering performance standards. So it isn't an organization that's just, roses, right, so to speak, that everyone just feels super comfortable just to do whatever that they want, because we recognize there are still rules and structures within an organization that people must operate. But what it is it does cause a look at organizations to be a high trust organization and a low fear organization. When that happens, we'll talk a little bit about that down the road. People tend to work to their fullest potential, but also they tend to belong to the organizations as well. So Tim Clark has, if you are interested in looking at the 4 stages in depth, even after this presentation, Tim Clark came out with a book called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. So him and Amy Edmondson right now are really the gurus in this field of talking about this. And they travel around the country working with some of the top organizations and firms in the country as well. So we're going to look at those 4. So those 4 are inclusion safety, learner safety, contributor safety, and challenger safety. So we're going to sort of take each of those one by one for a little bit of time here and to go a little bit more in depth on what that means. So that inclusion safety. So how do we create inclusion safety? So inclusion is really coming down to how do people belong? What is their sense of belonging in your organization? And here are 5 ways that we do that. The first one is we listen and we pause. So when ones are talking, we listen with the goal of trying to figure out what they're trying to tell us and to reflect on that. All too often, people listen with the intention to rebut, and they miss out on what's actually being said. Or even worse, they're looking for words that are triggering within that conversation that they just want to shut down and leave that conversation altogether. So within creating inclusion safety, one of the things that we want to do is listen and pause. The second portion is we want to ask as much as we tell. So we all have knowledge that we want to share with individuals. But however, when we're asking questions, what that does is it gives a sense that you want to engage with that person. And it's a validation for engagement. And conversations tend to go much smoother when there are questions that are asked. Even if you think that you know the answer to the question, ask the question, because it also facilitates stronger relationships. The third portion is avoid the comparisons and competitions within the organization. So because someone possesses knowledge or strengths that we do not necessarily have, that should not be a threat to the organization. That should not be a threat to a leader. For example, There may be ones of the younger generation that are coming in right now that know a lot more than leadership does when it comes to IT and tech and all of these different things, even how to engage the younger ones that are looking to enter your organization. And that may not necessarily be the forte of someone that has been there 30 plus years and now they're a senior executive. But what we would want to do is, as leaders, we would want to listen and to hear that out, to see how we can reach ones, of the younger generation as well. 4, express gratitude and appreciation. This one really comes down to 2 things. Is 1, expressing gratitude and appreciation is free. It doesn't cost us anything. 2 of the most powerful words, thank you. When you thank someone that comes into your office, a lot of times that makes them feel good, but also it makes them want to engage with you later as well. And then 5, identifying our negative bias. So we all have them. Our negative bias could be towards people, it could be towards departments, it could be towards a strategy, all of those things. When we're going into a conversation or a meeting, we want to check whatever those negative biases are before we walk into those situations to ensure that that we're seeing everything from all perspectives, but also we're giving people a fair chance to express themselves. So one of the things that we want to do right now is you have a guide that is on your chair. It's a behavior guide to psychological safety. And if we turn to page 3, and here's the question for you and your partner. So I'm going to ask you to pick a partner. Maybe it's the person next to you, or you can actually, if the numbers don't work out, more than one is fine. Each person will pick one of the behaviors to improve or to start. So there's a list of at least 32 of these within inclusion safety, that first portion there. Discuss how to put that behavior into practice in the current role that you're at, and be ready to sort of report out at the end of that conversation. So if we could do that for about 5 minutes and then we'll check in. All right, so we're going to ask for volunteers. What were some of the things that were discussed within your group? This is the part I always love. There's a huge facilitation of dialogue, and then when I ask that question, everyone gets silent. Sir, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, you said that, if you didn't hear in the back, the importance of learning names. And I would even add learning how that name is pronounced, right? And using that as well. Any other groups? Sir. Great, thank you. Let's get one more, sir.
We picked listen and pause, where you're having a conversation with someone and they are not listening to you, they just want to jump in and talk, and so they're looking over you. How do you engage that person in the conversation? I struggle with that, particularly with board members. They're upset with things, and they're not going to listen to you. They're waiting for you to finish so they can tell you how upset they are about being told by them.
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards, humor. If you put humor into it, then you can bring the person back into the conversation. What do you want us to do? Cut the grass ourselves? Will we go there together? How about you and I go there and cut the grass? And as the humor comes in, then they are now engaged in the conversation.
Did any of them take up your invitation? All right, so we'll move to the second portion, this learner safety. So this slide here talks about learning, our intellectual learning, but also our emotional learning. So our thinking and our feeling brain. And it's interesting because no doubt when people are in an emotional state, heightened emotional state, what it does is it causes cognitive impairment. So all they are listening to is maybe the tone, maybe the way that a person is postured, and they're not necessarily thinking everything through. So it can actually affect the learner safety portion. So within learner safety, there are 5 ways here that we can often talk about how do we create that. Number 1, to share what you're learning. So like one of the most powerful ways to like encourage, others to learn is to share what you're learning. Share the topics, the insights, how did that make you feel like when you were learning it, how it can be applied within an organization. All of these things facilitate deeper relationships within an organization as well. But also, haven't we noticed that when someone is super excited about what they've learned, that enthusiasm becomes almost contagious. And it helps others to want to do the exact same thing or to share, what they've learned as well. And ultimately, it helps the organization to grow, and it keeps them in that state of growth when ones are constantly learning. The next one is frame problems before solve problems. So as a leader, a lot of times we will give an instruction, to our team, and the team goes off and they just start solving a problem. But yet we've never framed it. It's never been framed for them. And so a lot of times within those teams, they spend time trying to figure out what is the right answer, what are the best alternatives, all of these things without a proper framing, of that. So it's interesting that Tim Clark says this as part of a way to do that. It says, find a problem and say, I'd like for you to help me to frame this problem, not to solve it. I want to make sure I'm defining the problem correctly before I try to solve it. So therefore, you actually put the ball in their court to frame it to assess if they understand what you're asking them to do. And when that happens as well, you give them this latitude and this autonomy to go into not only to frame the problem, but also to solve it, as well as going forward. And they feel like they're part of the team. The third portion is share what you unlearn. So there are things, and that's an interesting take, is to share what you unlearn. So there are things that we do that just did not work. For one reason or another, it didn't work. Share that. Not only like what's working, but share, hey, I've tried this. This is not the way to go about this. And that helps as well, because when people are going down that same path that we may have gone down to solve a problem or a project or something of that sort, once they figure out, okay, they've told me the things that doesn't work. Now let me look at the options that do. But then they also feel that you're supporting them as well, versus it's, let me see what you got, come back, no, that's wrong, right? Go back to the drawing board. But instead, you've already laid out some things to help to facilitate those conversations. 4, dedicate time and resources to learning. This is something within a psychologically safe organization. This is a dedicated portion of the budget, that continuous learning within an organization. Having your employees join organizations that helps them to further their professional development. That should always be a part of the budget conversation. And then share your past mistakes. A lot of times, what happens in organizations when a mistake is made, what is the first thing that people attempt to do? Hide it, right? They hide the mistake. But there's a lot of learning in mistakes. And also what that does is when you share the mistake or the mistakes that you've made, it creates an environment of where people aren't always heightened that if I make this mistake, this is the punitive action that's going to come after that. Versus if you flip that, it becomes an organization of where this is an opportunity for me to learn more. All right. So we're going to do the same thing with behavior safety. All right. So you guys are going to take about 3 to 5 minutes. You're going to talk with your partner, same partner, and failed to mention that the question is sort of at the top as well, but pick one of those things under behavior safety, discuss it, we'll share out as well. I'll also note that there are some note cards that are on your seat. if you come across and you have a question, please write them down. Dr. Phil Harris will come through and collect them, as well, and we'll answer them later. So let's do 3 to 5 minutes with your partner. All right, so we're going to look for 2 or 3 groups to talk about what you, or to share what you talked about. So who would like to go first? All right, and if you don't mind, there's a mic in the middle.
All right, so our group picked 2 things. First thing we picked was provide unwavering support through low points. There are a lot of times when a department director, somebody has a great idea, we've talked about it, we've educated, we bring it up to council, and it just gets completely shot down. And for some people, that's very demoralizing. They spend a lot of time and effort, and it's almost like being a coach, supporting them through that transition and saying, well, what can we learn from this? Or maybe it wasn't the right time, or maybe there's something going on that you don't know about that's creating a decision for them that, politics doesn't meet, logistics and reality, or we just didn't communicate the right way. What we can learn from it and do it again. So not to, be a coach. The other thing we picked was encourage the emotional side of learning to build confidence, emotional intelligence, and how to bring that to bear to really be able to get through the sticky situations and come through with empathy. Other people treating you with an empathetic side, and you treating other people, through empathy, to be able to learn without fear. Because as you mentioned before, people experience fear, or they don't even know they're pushing against you, and you're creating, and you have a physical reaction to it that people, if you don't stop and calm yourself down, you don't even realize you're experiencing it. And you really can't be flexible and really do a great job if you're experiencing fear all the time. Removing that helps a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much. Another volunteer. Elaborate, share past mistakes. Yeah, absolutely. One more. Ma'am? Yeah. Great, thank you. All right, so the next phase that we'll move into, and I'll say these next 2 phases can be difficult for leaders in general. Contributor safety. It's given autonomy with guidance in exchange for results. So in this phase of contributor safety, it's interesting because contributor safety really satisfies our basic human need to make a difference. A lot of us are in public service because we want to make a difference. And we want to be able to contribute to conversations as well. But it also tells us that we feel safe to share our knowledge, our experience, our skills, and our abilities without reprisal. So a lot of times when people look to contribute, and if their hand is smacked proverbially smacked in that contribute, how likely are they to want to contribute later on? They may have something to contribute, but it may just say, nope, forget it. I'm not doing that again. So it's interesting because it's that social exchange for results. So for a leader, what they're really looking for is they'll give that guidance. This is what I would like for you all to do. Now go make that happen. And when that happens, you organically have teams that will work together, and they produce some really good products when they do that. So how do we really do that? Is one, that we have to use the why as a motivation. Maybe starting what you're asking them to do, telling them why you're asking them to do that, right? That why really helps them to perform at a greater rate and their potential within that project. When they understand the why, that creativity really starts to flourish. Second, assign the what. So what is it that you want them to do? So normally we divide it up You try to divide them equally by task. But often some of these psychologically safe organizations, what they do is they divide it up with ones that are willing to perform the tasks and their competency within that area. So if we stick people in a task that they're not prepared for, they don't necessarily understand the why, they don't necessarily have the skills to perform that task, it could be sort of daunting. And especially if it hasn't been framed in a way that they can understand what you're actually asking them to do. And third, we delegate the how we would want it to be done. And part of that is once you delegate all of those things, you really transfer ownership down to the team to make all of these things happen. So when we're looking at behaviors that create contributor safety, there are 5 ways to do this. One is shift from the tell to the ask. So instead of telling them initially, this is what I want you to do, this, and this, versus how would you go about doing this? It's a big difference, right? So now you're asking them to contribute, and ones that feel that way, it sort of becomes almost like a think tank within the area, and they feel valued within their contributions. 2 was ask people what they think. We talked about that a little bit. Celebrate the small wins is 3. Not everything is going to be major. Not everything is going to be something that is so huge that's going to be transformational. But those small wins of how things were structured, but also we don't want to necessarily delay on celebrating those small wins, because some people may be a part of a team and they might not have all the experience, but they're showing up every day to make this project work. They're showing up every day to the organization to make the organization better. So we want to celebrate the small wins. 4, help others to see their strengths. All too often, people have hidden talents and hidden strengths that they don't even know that they have. But in contributor safety, that really comes out. For example, we may have one that we think they don't contribute as much because they're not necessarily vocal. But maybe they didn't have the permission to be vocal in other positions that they've had in roles. But once they're in a team setting and you've done the things that we've already outlined, it's very interesting how we can go about that and how they can contribute at a greater rate. And then 5, approach failures with curiosity rather than criticism. So asking, why did you go about it that way? Have them explain what was their thought process and why they decided to go about that, that way. So we're gonna do the same thing here, is to create that contributor safety. Let's do about 3 minutes on this one, because I think we're getting close to time here for this presentation. Choose a portion under contributor safety, discuss it with your partner, and we'll get 1 to 2 answers from that. All right, we'll bring everyone back in. So let's take one question, because we're getting a little short on time. What were some of the things that you talked about in your group when it came to contributor safety? We'll get 1 comment on this one. Anything discussed under contributor safety?
We talked about celebrating small wins. The only way you can do all of this is by being on incremental things and positive things in your organization. And celebrate them, build on one another, and build a bigger wave of change.
Yeah. He said celebrate the small wins. All right, so the next one we're going to go through, and it's challenger safety. So we're going to go through this pretty quickly because we're getting short on time and we want to get you all out of here on time. So really, challenger safety is air cover in exchange for candor. And so there are 5 ways that we really do that. And this challenger safety is really, it can be a difficult thing, because for a manager, what you're looking to do is you want to increase sort of that intellectual friction where people have those differing of opinion, and sort of reduce that social friction within a team. And really how we do that is it's around respect. And all too often, that's something that seems to be overlooked, but when people respectfully come from their point of view, it's easier to have a disagreement that way. So 5 ways. So for a leader, you want to model the art of disagreement. What does that actually look like? 2, I really like to talk about this, is look for redundant, obsolete, or trivial, or the rot. So everything that we do at some point is going to become obsolete. We may have the competitive edge today, but tomorrow we may not have that. So the analogy that's really given, it's sort of like ice. It's not if it's going to melt, it's the rate that it's melting, right? So that's the thing that we really want to look at when we look at that, is that no matter within an organization or personally, change is always happening. 3, we want to weigh in last as leaders, because often if we go out front and we start off the conversation, that can quietly diminish, some of the conversation that we're looking for. Encourage others to think beyond their roles and to take your finger off the fear button. So if you're not in the room and if you're not there tomorrow, the organization is not going, where in a handbasket. It's going to continue, right? So we can take our hand off that fear button and allow ones this autonomy. And those are the ways that when we look at it, of what a psychologically safe organization is. And some of the takeaways is organizations that they report high levels of psychological safety also report lower levels of burnout and higher rates of retention. Psychologically safe organizations are described as the engine for performance due to its ability to encourage candid feedback and risk-taking. And psychological safety helps everyone to speak up. And as such, it is also a critical factor in promoting more inclusive workplaces. So those are the 4 phases of psychological safety. I hope that you all take this back to your organizations. I will have this final exercise for you all to do on your own time. I know we have to get to another portion, but thank you so much for coming to this presentation. I think we have a question that says, how do you draw out the person who is still reluctant to contribute? So I would say one of the things that we talk about all the time is that comes down to relationships. And you have to meet people where they are. So that person may be reluctant to contribute in a setting like this, but one-on-one in small groups, that may be their safe zone to do that. So know the strengths of your team, know the appearance of your team, their strengths, their weaknesses, and play to accordingly. So how can you use personality assessments in an inclusive way? So one of the things that we do in our organization is, especially within leadership, we all take a ton of personality assessments. And our results are released to other individuals that are in leadership as well. So you come to recognize that person's personality, how they think, and it could be whatever your personality is, it just tells you how you deal with other people, not more than it tells you about yourself. And some of the ways that you may be different than a person, I think that's when you strive to build those relationships even more, where you see those differences. So those personality assessments, I think, are key because it tells you a lot about how a person self-reports, how they like to learn and how they show up each day. So did you all want to introduce the panel or? Okay, good. All right, so everybody remember the panel? So the panel, I'm going to actually moderate this section of the panel as well. And so I'll throw this question out to the panel is, how can municipalities leverage belonging to drive economic development?
So what we see a lot in communities is that when we reach out to community members and say, hey, what do you want? What do you need? We do those surveys, but we know they're skewed. We know that the people who respond from the public, the people who are active, don't necessarily represent all of the voices and all of the needs and all of the perspectives. But if we can create a sense of belonging within the organization, what we can do is we can leverage the voices that we have in the organization. And if the organization reflects the community to some level, you're going to be able to incorporate those ideas and better implement. So the easy example would be you have a park with 10 tennis courts that are always empty. What do you do with that? Pickleball, right? And the pickleball people, they're nuts. They're going to go after you. You can't get the pickleball people to stop, right? But there are other groups and other purposes that you may not be hearing from. And so if you're creating that sense of belongingness where your staff can say, yeah, pickleball is awesome, but my family goes to a park every Sunday afternoon. And more space for picnic tables, more space that way. You're going to get voices and perspectives, and that's a really safe, easy example. But that's when you pull those ideas in from different sources, you're going to better serve your community, and a lot of that is going to be economic development. Those voices that are most marginalized are also often the parts of our communities that need the economic development the most. So it's capturing and it's connecting in a way that you can't without healthy communication happening.
Can I add something to that?
Yes.
In terms of economic development, I think if you're going to be successful at using concepts that we've talked about today to advance economic development within your community, it's a bit different from what we've talked about. But I think the reality is, one, your employees have to own their own job and have to feel that they own their own job. And very much that, to me, goes along with the idea of selecting people for fit for their job, and also selecting people who have high public service motivation to do the job. You want people that are selfless rather than self-interested and want to serve their community. Yep, that's one. You need to have diversity, obviously, in your organization, because if your organization does not reflect diversity to the community, the likelihood of having that community voice its wants and needs will be limited. I think not only in terms of your workforce, public sector workforce, but also in terms, and I think this is of critical importance, significant diversity on voluntary boards within the city. A lot of cities have voluntary boards, and you really do need to have the voices of representation across a number of community interests. And that can be very beneficial to growing economic development. Beyond that, understanding who are the key stakeholders that represent the community, whether they are people who are involved in government or not, you need to get their voice. If you can identify those people who are critically listened to by various interests in your community, you can develop, I think, a greater likelihood of marrying public-private partnerships for economic development.
Yeah, thank you. So this is an interesting question as well, and actually, I'll rephrase this because I know, Pam, you're in HR. So what data can municipalities or organizations use to determine the impact of belonging on an organization or on a community?
There's so much as far as the data and opportunities you can use, but I think you want to, I think you go back to the demographics too, making sure that you have a good sense or a good demographic of stakeholders, employees, leaders that are participating, so that when I think about belonging, I think about empowerment. You are empowering individuals to want to participate, to have their voice heard. And when you have people empowered, they're willing to do more and provide those. One of the examples you talked about was individuals that don't feel that they have a voice. And when you're empowered and you feel like you have a voice, then you're going to be able to participate and move forward and not only help that organization, but provide other details that you may not have thought about. So the data can vary. It really does depend on what the situation is and what you're looking at trying to achieve and what goal you're trying to get to.
Yeah. So to piggyback on that, because we did get a question from the audience that I gave a perspective on as well. Part of that data, so So how do you all think that we could use that personality assessment in a more inclusive way?
So what I would say is that you want to have a good facilitator, right? You don't want to be sending everyone, on a random website to do a personality test and then not handling it correctly. When it's done properly, it's an avenue for communication. It's the start of a conversation. It's a recognition of how one person perceives, one person operates, and it helps people to navigate, bridge those differences. When it's not used correctly or not facilitated correctly, what you have is a situation where people feel marginalized. They say, wait, I'm the only one in my organization that has this personality, therefore this, or this is the good personality, and I got the bad personality. And we also know that those tests, they work better when people fit neatly into the categories, but they're really continuum. So if you're kind of on any measure, kind of, if it's a sunny day, you're going to land here, and if it's a cloudy day, you're going to land here. You may not feel that those personality tests are as accurate in capturing who you are. So that it needs to be done well. And I'd also, I'm going to go ahead and put the plug out. Partner with your local universities. Partner with academics who do this. Get an outside perspective, someone who can bridge that divide. It can soften, those sort of trainings, those connections. But a lot of this work, and as far as the data, a lot of the data we look at are sort of HR, demographics, those things. But sometimes it needs to be a hard conversation, an uncomfortable conversation that happens, and getting someone outside of your organization to come in and give people a place where they can speak openly can be a powerful tool, as long as you're committed to actually using the data you get.
I would, along with the personality survey, I would really encourage organizations to do employee engagement surveys of some type to try to determine whether or not your employees feel that they have voice, whether or not they feel that there will be retribution if they take the risk of mentioning something. But I would give one caveat in doing that. If you do it, you better be prepared to use the information to make change, because if you don't, you're going to lose trust with your employees. If your employees expect that what you are providing them is an avenue for greater trust, cooperation, and involvement and belonging within the organization, and then you get this information and you thump it and don't use it, you've really hurt your organization more than helped your organization. And so if you are going to be doing these serious, make sure that your commission members are also serious about change. Anticipate resistance to change, because you got generational people like myself that may want to say no to what should be done, but have the courage of at least collecting the information, discussing the information, and maybe marginally adjusting it on that basis.
And one thing I would say on piggyback on that is, not only do you look at it, that is, you don't have to make big changes based on what that survey says. It's the small little things that you do that can make a bigger difference than replacing or putting something into place that everyone knows is going to cost more or take more time. But it's you being intentional with the small changes that you are able to do immediately that will make a difference.
Yeah, so auxiliary question to that. Some organizations, they'll do these assessments and they'll collect this data, and it may not be reflected in the organization. People don't really see how it's being applied. And then there's another survey that's coming out asking for very similar data. And I think sometimes people get into that sort of survey fatigue, if that is if that's a term. So what should organizations do when that frequency of the surveys is at a greater rate than actually the change that they're seeing.
I don't know if that's a luxury that I've seen in public organizations, but clearly I would say this. Any kind of survey that you're doing with your employees, try to keep it under 10 minutes, if at all possible, because the fatigue factor and the drop-off factor, if you're doing it even online, will occur very quickly. So you want to really be tight in terms of the development of the questions. What really, I think the value initially may be the fact that you're allowing your employees to have voice in the future aspects of the organization, and that's a critical first step. It's a first step to creating greater trust and communication, cooperation, and the like. But my argument would keep it as simple and short and effective as possible. And be careful not to over fatigue people by long surveys.
And piggyback on that and say not only that, but we have this instinct that we want to ask demographic data, right? You're sitting in front of the survey and you want to ask people, check this box if you're this, so we can kind of figure out where the problem is. And people are very, very scared to respond to these surveys. And they're scared of them because the surveys are abused. They're used widely in private sector, across organizations. Everyone has a horror story about when they responded to a survey and they gave the right answer and then their boss called them in. And so you don't want to be that organization. So if you can do things to really assure the confidentiality of the responses, and not ask people, how old are you, what race are you, what ethnicity are you, which office do you work in, and what's your title? Because people will see that and you lose their response as fast as can be. And that's another one where if you have a larger organization, it's a little easier to keep that sort of confidentiality, but do partner with outside sources who can run the survey and say, the leadership is going to get summary results of this. They're never going to see your individual answers. And that creates a wall of protection that might get you more honest answers. Because you don't want to do that survey where everyone lies and says, this is the best organization I've ever worked at, but I'm leaving next week. Right? You don't want that.
Yeah. And having that outside vendor help you develop that survey, they have other comparators as far as the questions, and also they can help you get to the point of what are you looking for, what are you trying to achieve by this survey. And then if the survey is developed in a way that the employees can appreciate, they're going to be your survey ambassadors. They're going to tell the other employees, hey, they asked me these questions, this is pretty good, you want to give your input.
Mm-hmm. So thinking out, side of the formal survey, like what's the importance of like the employee resource groups and things of that sort of where there's those informal conversations and how powerful is that to organizations?
The informal is much more of an indicator of your culture and much more powerful than anything you can ever put on an org chart, period. So when you start seeing patterns in your employees, you see this group of people always goes to lunch, right? You've seen these networks, and those networks within the organization can be tremendously valuable. We tend to undervalue those informal networks. So recognize how you can, as an organization, foster communication through networks that are happening organically, but also then facilitate more formalized organizations and recognize that what people are facing in life, sometimes we're not even thinking about it. Sometimes we might have a large group of single moms in an organization. What are we doing to help that group be a support to each other and to recognize the challenges there? So think more creatively about what it is that your employees are facing, what their lives are really about. And when you look at it from that way, instead of box checked, you're going to get to maybe some more constructive information and constructive supports for your employees.
And along those lines, if you're an organization that is promoting quality of life factors within your organization, you darn well better be willing to walk the walk. Because if you aren't willing to walk the walk, you're going to lose your people that way too.
So this was an audience member had this question, but it aligns with the question that's here. And it really is about those belonging efforts. So how did your organization respond to enhance efforts at creating a better sense of belonging? And was there any pushback? And the audience member asked specifically about, belongings that that's no longer allowed in certain organizations. They wanted to talk a little bit about that.
You mean you're no longer allowed to be a unique individual in one's being? You must be an android working for the organization. I think that's a boneheaded way to approach things, but I may be wrong.
With a group of us who've just completed some research and some work where we talked to DEI officers across the country and said, what does it take to do this right? What are the lessons learned from people in that position? And the overall message was, this is really, really hard work. And the pushback is the definition of the work. And sometimes it's like really passive aggressive stuff. Sometimes it's outward stuff. It's coming from your political leadership. It's coming from your community. It's coming from your other employees. But it's an uphill slog. And recognizing that and understanding that if you want to engage in this work, if you want to create that healthier culture, that you can't be shocked or upset or hurt. It's like being a boxer who's knocked down and just bounces right back up. And you have to be committed to that bounce back in a way to make. I mean, that's what we've heard from communities across the country.
My daughter is an HR vice president for organization, and one of the things that she told me today, and maybe this is a bit self-serving, that I don't believe it to be the case. She says that it is exceptionally important to invest resources in high quality and competent HR professionals, and then also provide them with the tools, including HR technology, in order to do the kind of work that needs to be done to create a much better organization.
Yeah, HR is all about change management, and it's consistent. So we're now, especially here in the state of Florida, in the middle of that. We know the work is important. These discussions have to happen. We just got to find a different way to do it now, to ensure that we're continuing to support, because it doesn't go away just because they said don't talk about it. We just got to find a different way to support our organizations, our leaders, to make sure the message isn't lost and they have the support that they need.
So we thank you all, and thank you for the panel. Let's give them a round of applause.